Liberals and atheists would often point out how Christianity has been detrimental for women, how it holds them back from thriving and living up to their potential. Look at this title: Ode to the Woman, the Bible Tells Me So. The Bible, Female Sexuality, and the Law. The central thesis of this book is preposterous. The author claims that the Bible is the handbook for the subjugation of women, and that the only true barrier standing between the Bible and the women is a secular government. This liberal author's lack of historical awareness is woefully dismal. This sort of historically skewed view that sidelines and undermines Christianity's contribution to the empowerment of women needs to be corrected and clarified in view of history. So, in this brief segment, I would like to argue that Christianity has been a force for good, particularly with regard to women empowerment since antiquity. More than any secular government, any liberal feminist group, it is the Christian gospel that has elevated the status of women and restored their dignity as the fellow image bearers of God since its very inception. We shall go over the Greco-Roman and Jewish attitude towards the women in the early centuries and how the Christian message revolutionized the condition of women and brought them to believe in the good news of Jesus Christ in droves. Now let's start with the attitude about women in the Greco-Roman world. In ancient Greco-Roman world, various prominent figures and philosophers held disparaging views about women. They were men shaped by the attitudes prevalent in their own times and age. They saw women as inherently inferior to men. For instance, Aristotle, one of the most influential Greek philosophers, argued that women were afflicted with a natural defectiveness due to the lack of certain qualities. He believed women were inherently inferior to men. He said that women are to men as the slave is to the master, the manual is to the mental worker, the barbarian to the Greek. A woman is an unfinished man, left standing on the lower step in the scale of development. His attitude is certainly reflective of his era, also shaped the attitude of his society. Caro the Elder, a notable Roman figure, took a harsh stance on women as well. He stated, "Woman is a violent and uncontrolled animal, and it is useless to let go the reins and then expect her not to kick over the traces. You must keep her on a tight rein. Women want total freedom, or rather to call things by their names, total license. If you allow them to achieve complete equality with men, do you think they will be easier to live with? Not at all. Once they have achieved equality, they will be your masters." Such views reflect the patriarchal mindset of their times, where women were seen as inherently unruly and needing strict control. Plutarch, a Greek biographer, believed that a wife should have no true feelings of her own, but share the husband's seriousness and sport his anxiety and laughter. His view suggests that woman's identity was not her own. She was to exist solely in relation to her husband, sharing his emotions and actions without possessing autonomy or individuality. Now, Cicero, a Roman statesman, also viewed women as inferior, arguing that due to their innate weakness, they should always be under the control of the guardians. In the Roman society, women had very few legal rights and were often subject to the authority of men, fathers, husbands, or male guardians. This culture of control and subjugation extended even into religious circles. Let's go over the Jewish attitude towards women briefly. How about the Jews in the Greco-Roman world? The way they looked at the women was also influenced by the surrounding cultural attitudes. There is a Jewish prayer attributed to the 2nd century sage, Rabbi Judah bar Ilai. It was recited by traditional Jewish men every morning. "Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has not created me, a woman." This prayer is part of the subgroup that expresses similar gratitude for not having been created a Gentile or a slave. A old fragment from Cairo, Geniza, includes this prayer and expands it further. "Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has created me a human, not a beast, a man, not a woman, an Israelite and not a Gentile, circumcised and not uncircumcised, free and not a slave." This is essentially reflecting the same misogynistic attitude prevailing in the pagan societies of their times. The attitude of the Gnostic heretics towards women also reflected the sentiments of the times. Gnostic heretics, groups that were rejected by the early Christians for their absurd and fringe views, did not believe in the biblical equality. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the Gnostic texts, echoed the same patriarchal sentiment. In this Gnostic Gospel, in one of the passages, Simon Peter says this: "Let Miriam or Mary go from among us, for women are not worthy of the life." The Gnostic Jesus supposedly responds, "I will lead her so that I might make her a male, in order that she too may become a living spirit, resembling you males. For every woman who makes herself male will enter into the kingdom of heaven." This notion further devalued women, presenting the idea that women could only attain spiritual worth if they transitioned into man. And needless to say, early Christians promptly rejected this idea. Now let's come to the Christian attitude towards women. Christianity came into this rigid world where women were reduced to insignificance, both in the public spheres and even at home. Christianity took this world and transformed it. The example of Jesus towards women and the teachings of the apostles set the tone for the Christian attitude towards women. Jesus Christ, in his dealing with women, showed great empathy, compassion, respect, dignity. He engaged in conversations with women as equals. He touched and healed women who were pushed aside by the societies. He was willing to talk to societal outcasts like the Samaritan woman. He had women followers and disciples. Women were the first ones to hear the news of the most glorious event in history, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Dorothy Sayers said this about Jesus' approach to women: "Perhaps it is no wonder that the women were first at the cradle and last at the cross. They had never known a man like this man. There never has been such another, a prophet and a teacher who never nagged at them, never flattered or coaxed or patronized, who never made arch jokes about them, never treated them either as the women, God help us, or the ladies, God bless them, who rebuked without querulousness or praised without condescension, who took their question and argument seriously, who never mapped out their sphere for them, never urged them to be feminine or jeered at them for being female, who had no axe to grind and no uneasy male dignity to defend, who took them as he found them and was completely unself-conscious." The teaching of Christianity radically altered the way society viewed women. In contrast to Jewish prayers that thanked God for not being a woman, Paul's message in Galatians chapter 2, verse 28 declared, "There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." In fact, Paul took the threefold aspect of the Jewish prayer and inverted it and set it right as fitting for the Christian community. This declaration was revolutionary, emphasizing that in the eyes of God, all people were equal, regardless of gender or societal status. We have seen philosophers, historians, and politicians, and even heretics and Jewish attitude towards women. All had quite a low opinion on the status of women. They would consider women as subservient and not equal to men. On the other hand, early Christians would strongly reject such underlying cultural attitude and would set forth an alternative vision based on the scripture. Their beliefs reflected in how they treated women in the real world. I would like to highlight 4 areas in the lives of women where Christianity made a significant difference. First, Christians resisted female infanticide in the Roman world. Roman society practiced infanticide, particularly targeting female infants. It was common for families to abandon or kill newborn girls due to their perceived lack of value. A girl child was thought to be a burden. Rodney Stark, in his popular book Discovering God, he notes this: female infants were dispatched in large numbers, and only a few families raised more than one daughter. In the city of Rome, for every 131 males, there were only 100 females. The gap was wider in the rest of the Roman world. In the Roman world, it was quite common for parents to abandon an unwanted infant, particularly females, in the woods or to leave them along the roadside. Some of these infants would die from the elements or from wild animals. In other cases, these children would be taken and raised to be slaves or prostitutes. This societal rejection of female life can be seen in a letter that was sent from a Roman soldier to his wife. This is what the soldier wrote to his pregnant wife. Know that I am in Alexandria. Do not worry if they all come back and I remain in Alexandria. I ask and beg you to take good care of our baby son. And as soon as I receive payment, I shall send it upon you. If you are delivered of a child, if it is a boy, keep it. If a girl, discard it. You have sent me a word, do not forget you. How can I forget you? I beg you not to worry. The normalization we see in this letter of such practices like female infanticide, female exposure, reflects how little value was placed upon women and girls in the world prior to Christianity. In stark contrast to the prevailing attitude of the Roman and Jewish societies, early Christianity introduced radical teachings on the value of life. The Christian message emphasized the sanctity of all life, both male and female. The Christians countered the widespread practice of abortion and infanticide in the Roman society. One of the early Christian teachings, as outlined in Didache, considered to be the teaching of the 12 apostles, firmly opposed abortion and infanticide. The Christian worldview offered a transformative approach to life and human dignity. As Justinian, a Byzantine Christian emperor, later codified, it became illegal to abandon children. He commanded that every person should support his own offspring, and if someone abandoned a child, they would face legal consequences. The early church also advocated the adoption of abandoned children, reflecting the value of love, care, and equality. Early Christian apologists like Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, and John Chrysostom criticized the pagans and pointed out how Christians protected, provided for, and nurtured their children, both males and females, according to the biblical stipulations. Now let's look at the second point where Christianity made a difference in the life of women. Christians encouraged lifelong heterosexual monogamous marriages. The Christian gospel assured security for females at birth. It also pushed for security for women in their marriages. In Roman society, marriage was often a legal or a social contract, especially for upper classes. For the lower classes, marriage was often more about family and personal bonds. Roman marriages had limited rights for women, and they were generally in a disadvantageous position. The husbands, particularly the Roman upper class, would have the freedom to engage in extramarital affairs and have concubines, while maintaining one legal wife, as Roman law required to be officially married to only one person. The adulterous behavior of men was tolerated or seen as a sign of power and status. On the other hand, the women were generally expected to remain faithful within their marriages, and adultery was considered a serious offense, often with harsh penalties. Marriage was not necessarily seen as a lifelong commitment to each other until death do them apart. Christian gospel transformed the societal attitude towards marriage. Christians rejected promiscuous lifestyle that was permitted within the Roman society and chose to remain within the boundaries of marriage, honoring and prioritizing holiness within marriage. Christian teachings reshaped the understanding of marriage as a lifelong covenant commitment between one man and one woman. The Bible commanded husbands to love their wives. Ephesians chapter 5 verse 25 says, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her." Roman society viewed marriage more as a societal or a legal contract, and husband's role as one of dominance or authority. Christianity placed the husband in the role of a servant leader. Christ's sacrificial love for the church served as an ultimate example for husbands to follow. The idea of a husband dying to himself for the well-being of his wife was radically countercultural. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21 to 33, the idea of mutual submission is emphasized. While this passage starts with the instruction for wives to submit to their husbands, The concept of mutual submission was a new idea in the Roman world, where wives were often treated as the property of their husbands and had limited social standing or autonomy. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 4, Paul writes this: "The husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Likewise, the wife does not have authority over her body, but the husband does." This teaching was revolutionary. It emphasized mutual respect and shared authority in marriage. It was indeed a significant departure from the Roman custom where men had complete control over their wives. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, Paul writes, "Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers." Christianity elevated women's dignity by instructing husbands to treat them as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, indicating that wives too were co-partners in the grace of God. In short, the Christian marriage promoted a countercultural understanding of marriage as a covenant relationship marked by love and lifelong commitment. Husbands were encouraged not just to exercise authority, but to listen, understand, be patient, and love. The overall message was that love in marriage should reflect the love and care that Christ showed to his followers, one that is generous and conditional and patient. Now let's look at the third point. Christianity treated women as co-workers in God's work. Roman society was patriarchal, and women were generally excluded from formal positions of power and authority, both in political and religious spheres. However, they were allowed to function as Vestal virgins and priestesses in Roman cults with limited influence. On the other hand, women played a significant role in the early Christian movement, especially during the time of Jesus and the apostles. Though society at large often marginalized women, early Christianity offered a more inclusive space for them, both in terms of participation and leadership. Jesus himself demonstrated a revolutionary approach to women. He engaged with women publicly, treated them with dignity, and welcomed them as disciples. For instance, Mary Magdalene was one of his closest followers, and she was the first to witness and report his resurrection. And the women who supported Jesus' ministry financially were integral to the spread of his teachings. In the early church, women were also active in spreading the gospel. Priscilla, along with her husband Aquila, played a key role in teaching and mentoring leaders like Apollos. Other women, such as Phoebe in Romans chapter 16, verse 1, and Eunia in Romans 16:7, they held prominent roles in the church and were acknowledged by Paul for their mission work. In one of the letters Pliny the Younger wrote to Emperor Trajan, he writes about the customs of early Christians that he found quite puzzling. He mentions unlikely women from the lower strata of society in leadership roles within the Christian community. In Book 10, letter 96, Pliny writes about the Christians. "I have been unable to discover anything definite about the Christians, except that they are in the habit of meeting on a fixed day before dawn and singing in turn a hymn to Christ as to a God. I have been proceeding to torture 2 female slaves who were called deaconesses, but I found nothing but a degenerate superstition." Think about this. In a society that frowns upon having women leadership, Christians were accepting female slaves as leaders within their community. It was strongly a revolutionary move and countercultural. This is how gospel penetrated and broke negative attitude towards women. While women were not apostles, they contributed significantly to the Christian community through leadership, hospitality, and other ministry. Christianity's acceptance of women in leadership roles marked a departure from the strict gender norms of the times. And finally, Christians cared for helpless widows. In ancient Roman society, older widows faced significant hardships due to societal structure and limited economic and social mobility available to women. With the death of their husbands, widows, particularly older ones, often found themselves financially vulnerable, especially if they lacked a dowry. children, or relative to provide for them. While Roman women could own property, their legal rights were often restricted, and many widows had to depend on male guardians or relatives to manage their lives, which limited their autonomy. Older widows were often marginalized, as Roman society placed heavy emphasis on marriage and family. Without a husband or children to support them, widows might experience isolation and stigma. The legal and societal pressure on women, especially those with fewer resources, could lead to a sense of disempowerment. The overall conditions for oldest widows in ancient Rome were often precarious, with their well being dependent on the familial and societal connections. Not just in ancient Rome, but also in ancient India, widows didn't get much social support at all. They were treated as burdens on the society. Hindus in India practiced an inhuman ritual known as sati. They burned the widows in the funeral pyre of their husbands. It was a tireless effort of Christian missionaries like William Carey that ended this heinous practice for good. The Hindus didn't simply care about the widows, but the Christian missionaries did. Similarly, the Romans didn't care about their widows, but the early Christians did. They treated the widows with great compassion and care, reflecting the teaching of Jesus on love, charity, and caring for the vulnerable. Christian communities, particularly in cities of the Roman Empire, recognized the hardships widows faced and took steps to provide support, especially those without family, to care for them. In some communities, the church would directly provide for widows' needs, ensuring they had enough to live on. In addition to material support, widows were given respect within the Christian community. Many were assigned roles of spiritual importance, serving as prayer leaders or deaconesses. The New Testament, particularly in the letters of Paul, emphasized the church's duty to honor widows and ensure that they are cared for. For example, Paul instructed Timothy to establish a list of widows who were supported by the church, with a focus on those who are over 60 years old, of good character, and had no family to support them. Through all these efforts, early Christians created a network of care, helping widows to live with dignity despite their vulnerable position in the society. Not just in ancient times, Christian advocacy and compassion for the weak continues well into the modern world. It is firmly rooted in biblical foundations that aim to restore and uphold the vision of creation. Christianity always held this in view, that women are the fellow image bearers of God and co heirs and fellow inheritors of divine promises. Therefore, they ought to be treated with dignity at every turn. Now, here is my closing reflection. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius mocked Christianity for taking in a lot of women converts. This is what he said. They, Christians, have gathered together from the lowest dregs of the people number of ignorant men and credulous women, always ready to believe anything, and have formed a rabble of impious conspirators. Similar criticism was also echoed by other critiques of Christianity, like Celsus, a pagan philosopher. It is only foolish and low individuals and persons devoid of perception and slaves and women and children of whom the teachers of the divine word wish to make converts. But why did they leave Roman traditions for Christianity, knowing that it would further disadvantage in the society where Christians didn't hold any institutional power? The reality is this: the Roman society did not protect the females in their birth, and they were in greater risk of being exposed and killed. And they did not have a voice in marriage and were not loved and cherished with mutual lifetime commitment in marriage. They were not given leadership roles or prominent places within their communities. Their widows were at risk of poverty if they didn't have a male heir or family to care for them. Society called them burdensome and treated them as second-class citizens from their birth to their old age. And so when they discovered Jesus and his gospel, the truth that they were created in the image of God, they were valued, their life protected at birth, dignity restored in marriage, security guaranteed in old age, they did not hesitate for a moment. They joined the Christian church in large numbers. The gospel set them free from the tyranny of an ungodly culture that held them back and mistreated them for centuries. Often atheists and liberals assume that they are the rightful champions of women's rights. They often forget the role Christianity played and still plays in cultivating compassion in individuals towards the weak and advocating for the vulnerable around the world. This is exactly the point Jordan Peterson made while talking about the importance and impact of Christianity on the Western society to atheist Richard Dawkins.
Let's talk about the oppression of women.
Yes.
We make a scientific case that that's inappropriate? Or is it a case that we're making on some other grounds? Like I see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the earliest pronouncements is that both men and women carry the image of God, both. And that sets a certain tone to everything that follows. And it is a remarkable proclamation given its radical age, that both men and women carry the image of God and are to be treated as something with intrinsic value outside of the domain of power and politics. It isn't obvious to me, having thought about this a lot, how we deal with that in the pure realm of fact. Because one of the facts is, if I can oppress you, why the hell shouldn't? Origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise. So there's some power in that story.
Dawkins was stunned with Dr. Peterson's argument and essentially agreed with him. Just look around the world. Wherever Christianity took root and had a greater social impact, it treated women kindly, empowered them, and raised their dignity. The Bible says, by your fruits you shall know them. On the other hand, if you compare the societies where other religions are dominant, you would find greater repression, disempowerment, and inequality there. There is simply no comparison. Early Christianity's message of life, dignity, and equality radically transformed how women were viewed in a patriarchal world. Christianity's insistence on the inherent value of all human life, its teaching on mutual respect within marriage, and its vision of equality before God provided women with a sense of dignity that was unparalleled in the ancient world. These teachings helped to spread Christianity throughout the Roman Empire and continues to offer a new hope to women who are long been marginalized and devalued in societies around the world. There is transformative power in the gospel of Jesus Christ. The individuals, the societies, and nations that have believed and practiced the values of Christianity have been immensely benefited and remain some of the freest and most advanced nations in the world today. For the gospel is the power of God. It breaks down the shackles of superstition and the tyranny of godless cultures. It leads everyone who believes to the joyous freedom and blessings in Jesus Christ. Thank you for watching this video. I'm glad you stayed thus far to check out this video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe and support our channel. Click on the bell icon so that you can get notification whenever we post a new video. Also, feel free to leave your thoughts and questions in the comment section below. God bless you all. Shalom.